Nina Teicholz and Roberto Ferdman, and they're going to be helping us all to get to the bottom of a question. Have a seat.
Standing up.
So, by way of quick intro, I was invited here just because, not because I'm some food expert. I did a stunt. I think it's fair to call it. I did a real human subjects clinical trial to test the health effects of chocolate. Okay, we got real people to go on controlled diets, and some of them involved chocolate and some of them didn't. And at the end of the study, we collected all the data, ran stats on it. So far, so good, right? Real science. We discovered a statistically significant effect, namely that if you go on a low-carb diet and eat a bar of chocolate every day, you lose weight faster than just going on a low-carb diet. And it's faster compared to control diet. So, you said why?
I say wow.
Wow. Well, indeed, and the world said wow, because which I enabled them to do, because we published the paper, and then we wrote a really kick-ass press release. And no one can write a press release like a journalist. I just assume that all my colleagues are as lazy as I am. So you basically hand them a story. That's how it works. All you journalists in the world know, in the room know exactly what I'm talking about. I provide the lead. I've got a kicker. I've got great quotes ready for pulling. It's got kind of a sexy little metaphor that I built into the whole thing. And we even, and this is true, you can hire people on the internet to do anything. We commissioned 2 songs about the health benefits of chocolate, made music videos, we provided art, graphics. And sure enough, it was picked up first by Das Bild, which, if you're not familiar with media beyond America, is the largest newspaper in Europe. And then from there, it just went gangbusters around the world. Next thing I knew, it was on morning TV shows in Texas and Australia. And then the moment that I knew that everyone really bought this was I went in Penn Station and I got Shape magazine off the newsstand. And on page 128, it said that something about a chocolate study, a bold headline about you should eat chocolate every day. And it quotes Johannes Bohannon, PhD, the head of the study. That's me. My name is actually John Bohannon, but so the whole point of this thing was that, and this is the bold claim we're going to test together today. Let me put it this way. This house believes that the media coverage of nutrition and diet is mostly pseudoscience. Okay? This is an Oxford Union house-style debate. So we start with a really bold, ideally overbold position. And you guys need to decide where you stand on it now. And then we're going to find out where you stand at the end after we get to the bottom of this. And we don't get points for having more people believe our position. You get points for moving people. If you're undecided now and you move to convinced or unconvinced, that's what determines the game. So I need to gather some stats from you. And it's really hard to do from here. I need 2 or 3 volunteers who know how to count hands. Just be bold and help me out. Someone just volunteer. Or otherwise I'm going to pick you.
One over there.
Raise your hand. Great. OK, you're going to be my backroom counter, OK? Now I need someone to handle this slab. Awesome. OK. Now I need someone to handle this slab. Thank you. OK, so I've got my 3 counters. You guys know your designated areas. Let's try this out. You've heard the position. This house believes. If you are undecided, and take this seriously, imagine you are going to have to defend your position publicly. So be conservative. Probably most of you will be undecided. If you're decided in favor, raise your hand. Counters, count all hands. Hands really high, please. OK, I'll read the statement again, which I made up 10 minutes ago. This house believes that, what was it?
Nutrition journalism.
Nutrition journalism
Pseudoscience.
is mostly pseudoscience. OK, raise your hand if you are convinced of that. OK, counters, see how fast you can count.
We got 9.
OK, hang on. I'm pulling up my calculator. 9. Someone have pen and pencil? Can you write down the results?
I do.
Thanks. You be the data guy.
I got you.
OK, 9 and And then? 14. Okay, we've got 33 in favor. Raise your hand if you are nay. It is not mostly pseudoscience. Raise them high, be bold, come on. Counters?
3, or count them as that's and I caught
3 and 1. Okay, so
You need to ask
4.
how many people don't like raising their hands.
4 against, no, we're just not going to include them. Okay, and undecided, and this is important because we need the baseline. Okay, counters, raise them high, please. No bends and elbows, straight up.
19.
19. 19 plus 5 plus 17. 41 undecided. Okay, thanks everyone. Without much further ado, let's dive right into the question at hand. I'm going to start with Fernando.
Roberto.
I'm not talking to you. I'm going to start with Roberto Ferdman.
Ferdman, it's Spanish Jewish is the easy way to.
Oh, that's embarrassing. Fernando, please stand up. Okay. Sorry. I'm going to start with Roberto. Can you just give us the top-level view, gut reaction from a straight-up Washington Post reporter who covers a lot of health and nutrition science?
So my initial reaction to that statement, which I do mostly agree with, is that there's a problem not just with nutrition journalism, but actually with nutrition research and research in general at the moment, which I experience on a daily basis. I don't just write up studies. I kind of will use studies to talk about broader issues. But the problem is this. It's that the pressure to publish things, both as a journalist today and as a researcher today, the things that allow for your longevity in these careers is to publish often. That's how you advance your career. What that means is that the reason why you publish a piece of research or you write about a piece of research is not because you want to advance a discussion. It's because you think that people are going to be attracted to it. I see this every single day. I see this all throughout the internet. And the problem is exacerbated by the fact that there are all of these different media companies competing for the same exact story. I'm sure that you see the same exact story run across your feed with different headlines by various different media organizations.
For example?
I mean, ideally, our piece, though I can't always control that, about a study that is legitimate is as fair-handed and accurate as possible, so that you don't leave it thinking, tonight I'm going to eat globs of butter because no matter how much I eat, all it's going to do is make me lose weight. And that when you read Elite Daily's version of it, it'll say something totally ludicrous and you won't believe it. But that's not the case. And I actually have a specific example that shows this. I wrote about a study about butter, specifically in the Netherlands, not because I wanted to talk about its findings. I wanted to talk about its findings in the context of who funded it. It was funded by the Danish dairy industry. And it found that butter has a marginally bad effect on your blood cholesterol. Nothing serious, I mean, just a little bit worse than olive oil. It was very unlikely, though, that this study finds something at all negative about butter, because industry funding is something that has been found by people who look closely at it to correlate with findings that are in the best interest of those who supported it. If you look at
But this
studies,
was the opposite.
This was the opposite, right. So I used it to say, okay, sorry, I'm getting to my point. The final point is this. It's that the entire piece was about how unlikely this is and how you should be very, very skeptical of the studies you read, and you should make sure, as a journalist or just as a reader, because sometimes, or often journalists don't, who is funding this research. The headline was, a study about butter funded by the butter industry found that butter is bad for you. Not because your takeaway should be, I shouldn't eat butter, but when I went and looked at the comments on Facebook, because sometimes when I'm feeling good about myself, I need to go somewhere to feel really bad about myself, I found that the entire discussion was about how this is just another piece about, you know, butter is good for me or butter is bad for me. I don't know. No one was reading the piece. People were just reading the headline, which is, you know, hopefully is another discussion in and of itself.
All right. Nina is an investigative journalist who's written a book about fat and has gone beyond the role just as a reporter to be an advocate. I think it's fair to say for science, better science.
Good science, yeah.
Good science in diet and nutrition reporting. Nina, do you think that the problem that Fernando, Roberto is identifying is something that's special to diet and nutrition? And if so, why?
Well, I want to pick up on what I think the issues are that Roberto brought up, which is he's absolutely right that there's one of the issues is there's insufficient skepticism by journalists. I mean, I spent nearly a decade diving into doing the deep dive in nutrition science to write my book, and I realized like the amount I could spend like an entire day just looking at one study, really trying to understand, what exactly did it say? Was it representing its conclusions fairly often? The conclusion won't even really reflect the actual data because of bias that's in the field. So this is a field where it requires so much rigor, and it is hard. I salute Roberto for even looking at the funder of a study. I mean, most nutrition journalists really don't look at that. I'll give you another example, because one of the things that I found is that when people do look at the funders, they're much more likely to note if it's, they're likely to note if it's butter or if it's beef or if it's dairy, which has its whole own history. But for example, on the other side of that issue, there's a study in cell metabolism that came out last year that seemed to show an association of a higher protein diet with mortality. And it was like, there were all kinds of problems with that study. I spent like 3 days looking at the study. Well, then I noticed, it's funded, the authors were the owner and 3 employees of a company called L Nutra, which was a plant-based protein company or a plant-based supplement company.
Is that an automatic strike against the science?
No, it isn't. But that study went around the world. There were headlines, amazing number of headlines generated by that study, and none of them noted the funding source. So that kind of skepticism, really looking at a study very, very carefully and seeing who funds it and understanding the totality of what it says, is something that I think that journalism just can't, daily journalism, even weekly journalism, it's really hard to do that. And I've just seen so many instances of that. Can I talk about one other issue that I think is just, and we've talked about this before, and that is really underlies a lot of the bad reporting on this field, which is that the churn of studies coming out are mainly what's called epidemiological studies. They show associations, but they can't show causation, right? And so what's the problem there? Well, like yellow fingers are associated with lung cancer. Does that mean yellow fingers give you lung cancer? No, smoking gives you yellow fingers, and that gives you lung cancer. But associations are there to suggest hypotheses that then have to be proven in clinical trials, which is the more rigorous kind of evidence. But epidemiological studies, there is a tremendous churn. They come out of a computer database. You can hit a button in the evening, and the next morning you have a paper. And a clinical trial, by contrast, takes many years to do, and you get the same one paper at the end of that. But if you're a journalist, you've got constant flow of epidemiological findings coming in. There are associations, and maybe you put in a caveat about how that's not really causation, it's just association, but it's still a headline, and it's still out there, and people still think it's real. I mean, I want to just give a real-life example from this week, which is the WHO decision on red meat and cancer.
Bacon kills you.
Bacon and sausages are on par with cigarettes as a convincing cause of cancer, grade 1 carcinogen. That was based on epidemiological data with what's called a very, very weak association, 1.7 or 1.8. So your total risk, this is just for your takeaway, your total risk of getting colon cancer over the course of your life is 4.5%. With that relative risk greater, it increases your absolute risk to 5.3%. So it's tiny.
Wait.
It is tiny.
You go from 5 point what to 4?
You go from 4.5 absolute risk to 5.3 absolute risk. And
that's a lot of risk, though.
Well, it is any risk below 5, according to the evidence-based medicine standards, is likely to be wrong because it's confounded by bias and confounding. And so when you get to 1 point, I mean, just to give you a contrast, smoking and lung cancer, the relative risks there were between 9 and 25. Now we're looking at 1.17. So that's just as likely to be biased or confounding. So that's another reason that it's very hard to digest this data, and partly it's the journalism and partly it's the nutrition science behind the journalism.
Here's something that confuses me looking from the outside in on this media beat. So I'm a general science journalist. I've written about everything under the sun related to science. And when it comes to health and nutrition, the science is every bit as intriguing and complicated as astrophysics. And the bizarre thing, and I'm not even exaggerating, we understand much better why a star gets obese than a human. It's actually very well understood. And so, I mean, that should tell you something. Humans are incredibly complicated. This is not easy science. And yet, the rate at which we have astrophysics headlines, like when was the last time you saw a big astrophysics? Once a week is generous, right? It's like once a month, maybe. So I don't understand why food-related health, diet, nutrition headlines, blockbuster science headlines are about once a day.
Well,
is it because it's just more appealing? Is that what's driving this?
Well, so
we can all relate to what we eat.
I don't write about nutrition specifically. In fact, what I write about often doesn't touch upon nutrition specifically. But I think the difference between astrophysics and food, I'm going out on a limb here, is that food is much more relatable, right? The glorious thing about writing about food is that no matter what you do, you eat it. You think about it, even if, like Steve, you don't care for it as much as others. But I think there's just a base level interest, no matter who you are, in food. And because of that, journalists have latched onto it, knowing that there will always be a readership there. Whereas with astrophysics, there are a lot of astrophysics pieces that I will not click on, no matter how catchy the headline is.
It's star is going to make you fat, for instance.
I might click on that. But I think I think it has a lot to do.
So we can relate to it.
Yeah, I think it has to do with relatability. But there's also this avalanche. It becomes this avalanche, right? As soon as we show an interest in it as journalists, researchers notice that there's been a peak in interest. As soon as they realize that by tweaking the way in which they pitch pieces, journalists bite, and not just people at the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, but every single person writing about anything that is being posted online and might go viral. And these result in, very real benefits for the people who are pursuing this research. Suddenly, they're famous, they're well known, they're well liked at their institution because
they get sexy.
Yeah, right. And for a nutritional researcher to get sexy is
that's big money. It translates to grants. It's a real thing. But maybe we're selling it short. It's not just that, our readers can relate to food. And isn't there also a food crisis that makes this much more relevant than astrophysics? Whether or not a star is going to go supernova doesn't affect your grandkids.
Well, we all want to know. There's a tremendous amount of nutrition-related disease in the country, right? Diabetes, obesity, heart disease, cancer. I don't even have to go through the numbers to everybody's. People desperately want to know what to eat so they don't have to have a heart attack, don't get fat. They want to know what to feed their children. It's just so obvious. Of course, we're obsessed with this subject, and it seems we haven't gotten it right. In the sense that we've obsessed about this subject, but obesity is on the rise, diabetes is on the rise. So there should be a big debate about it. I'm not against a constant drumbeat of stories, but I think there needs to be more serious debate, not this kind of, just reporting every study that comes out, because they're incredibly important issues. And clearly we haven't figured it out quite, for fighting nutrition-related diseases. So,
all right,
yeah, I'm for serious conversation about these issues. I think it should happen. I think rather than daily headlines, that's what we should be doing.
Well, let's talk specifically about these headlines. Let's try and narrow in on what we're getting wrong as reporters. So in the case of my chocolate study, for example, I can name a few things. No outside scientist was sourced. So all the coverage, even in the glossy magazines, not a single real expert was even asked. And if I guarantee any real expert had looked at my actual paper, they would have noticed that I used 15 people. And that when you use 15 people and you measure a couple dozen things about them, this is a little statistics trick, you are almost guaranteed to get a significant result. That's just math. So that's one problem. Another was that there was no real so they didn't report how many subjects, they didn't interview any real experts, but also they didn't put it in context. So we saw let's say that the effect we detected was real. It turns out it was a 10% faster weight loss, okay, if you ate chocolate compared to low-carb diet without chocolate. How much of what effect size is that? And this is what Nina was talking about. You can't just say up or down, good or bad. It will kill you or it won't. You actually always have to put some kind of number on that. How big of an effect? How much risk? And how much is that relative to stuff we should care about? So you can put things in perspective. None of the reporters did that as well. I mean.
Yeah, but again, the problem, as much as we want to criticize reporting, the problem also originates in, as you were saying, in the science itself, right? So the people who do these epidemiological studies will find that tiny effect. If you go from 1 to 1.2, and then they'll say, well, that's a 20% increase, and that will be in their press release, and that seems like a big increase, So, but it's a tiny absolute difference. But the scientists themselves are also invested in getting publicity. I mean, I've interviewed a lot of scientists, and they all tell me if I get covered in the press, that helps me get NIH grants. So we're part of this cycle. The more publicity, the better it is for scientists. So they have an incentive to up their results as well. And then we report on them.
But then don't we have to be all the more skeptical?
Skepticism would be good.
But I mean, how do you do that? So, right now there are not only food and nutrition reporters at magazines and newspapers that you may have heard of, but there are entire magazines and newspapers devoted to these topics. They just churn out these headlines. You go online, you're going to find websites devoted, they'll call themselves Women's Health or Men's Health, or not specifically Men's Health magazine, although.
Some do.
But that's actually kind of code for we're going to tell you what to eat or not, what not to eat, how to work out or how to not work out. And it's all based on science. And I actually think that whole industry should basically just collapse. It's not going to happen. I'm 100% serious. I just think it's all pseudoscience and it should just collapse. But that's not going to happen because we all, including me, I guess, like to read it. So what I don't understand is how to reconcile the market reality that people love to read about this stuff and the equally intense reality that it may actually just be bunk.
So I want to come back to one of the first points that I brought up, not because I think that figuring out who funded the study is the essential piece of knowledge to figuring out what is and isn't true, but I think it gets to the point you're saying. Understanding the incentives behind what you're reading will help you understand how to contextualize it. And what I found is, what I've concluded in the short term is that the best I can do is help people contextualize things, often things I'm not writing about. We talked about how part of the problem is that NIH funding for research by non-interested parties has withered away over the years, and in place of it, industry has come in. In some cases, that's because they're narratives that they don't like, true or not. Just because the egg industry is funding research about cholesterol that's finding that dietary cholesterol might not be as bad for you as we thought, doesn't mean that's not true. But I think that the fact that the conflict of interest exists means we should be very skeptical. In fact, I think I would go even further. I think that we should try to make sure that it doesn't happen. Industry should pool research so that no single party is pursuing research, is trying to prove something instead of asking a question. So I guess in short, my answer is empower people to be skeptical. I'm trying my best.
Nina?
I mean, clearly, because I spent 10 years researching a book, I'm oblivious to market demand or any kind of daily. So it's just not, I don't have an answer to that. I mean, I think I would add that this question of bias is so important, and it's not just who funds a source, but researchers bring bias, institutions bring bias. There's investments in certain hypotheses, and then you have an institutional, a professional investment in that. Researchers don't want to be wrong. People don't want to be wrong. People don't want to be flip-flopping on their public. So their bias comes from many sides. I don't know how you do that in daily, weekly journalism. It's hard.
Well, I mean,
commend you for trying.
We come back to your original hypothesis, which we have a conclusion of. I mean, I think that it's, when you write about behavioral psychology, for instance, the takeaway is often something that's interesting, but not necessarily actionable. The issue with writing about nutrition science is that it's actionable.
Like always.
Like always actionable. And I see it. I mean, I'll go out with friends who will say things like, well, bacon's great for me, and they'll order bacon that night. And I think that that's happening in multitudes. So I think it's dangerous, and I think that makes it a bit of a closer to pseudoscience than not.
Well, we've got about 5 minutes left, and I still want to do this experiment with prop. You were asking a question? Oh, no. And I guess I don't know how to round this up other than to say it sounds like we're kind of convinced.
Nobody argued against your proposition.
I should have chosen a bolder proposition.
There's a question.
How do you want to do questions? Because do you want to do them before or after the prop experiment? Up to me. I don't want to miss the chance. Think about your questions, and while you're thinking about them, everyone who has the little prop piece of paper, do you guys want to do the experiment?
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure.
Everyone take it out. These look like communion wafers. So the correct way to do it is to do this and then put it on your tongue. You will know instantly what you are genetically when you put your tongue on this thing. It's not ambiguous. It either tastes like paper.
Cut their hand if it goes really bad for them?
How do we do this? Why don't we? Everyone, get your paper ready. Okay. Open it up.
Ugh.
Mine tastes terrible.
Ugh.
Open it up. Looks like we have a winner over here.
Gross.
I'm Jewish, and I love to salsa dance, so we must be genetically.
Yeah.
Okay. Get your paper ready. Everyone, get your paper ready.
Last name, Ferdman.
Okay. Everyone with me. You ready? No? And give it a try.
Again.
Yeah.
Back to it again.
Yes, bad.
Now, if you guys are a totally typical, me too. If you're a totally typical population, about 1/4 of you, and only 1/4 of you, should only be tasting paper. Okay? Raise your hand if it tastes like paper.
What's the alternative?
Okay, counters, you still with me? Yeah. Raise your hands high. Let's get this proportion.
Ugh.
Remember, this is real data. It's not going to be exactly 25%.
We got 11 in front.
Okay, hang on.
2, 4, 5, 6, 7.
11 plus.
I'd say 1, 2, 3, 4,
No, there's
5.
someone else.
Oh, I see.
7 over there.
Did you get these 4 over here?
Yeah.
2. Okay, we've got 20 non-tasters in the room. Now, raise your hand high if it tasted like shit. Okay, count them up. Let's see if it's more than 20%.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, give me numbers, counters. 15,
About 22.
22.
So maybe this is a function that weird people are in DC.
Is there a placebo effect happening?
No, it's
Is
super
the-
unambiguous.
Yeah.
It's one of those very few tests you could do on humans.
Well, it kind of
where
tastes
it's
that.
yes or no. I need a third number.
Last time.
Did I miss a counter?
That's true. Well, but also,
It was-
isn't the cooler answer? I'm able to discern.
Counters, give me your numbers again.
Yeah, right.
22,
22.
He did lead the audience.
22,
It's not a scientific.
15,
Said 6.
and 6. So 43 versus 20. Okay? Definitely enriched. So is it statistically significant? Probably. Is it meaningful? No, I'm sorry. But it confirms our hypothesis, so that's interesting. We're now going to vote on whether we've changed your minds. Okay?
Do you want to take the question? Or are we done?
Do you want to do the question?
Do we have time?
Do you want to do questions then vote?
Yeah, I think so,
they
because
wanted to do
the
questions.
questions might influence how they feel.
Good call. Okay. We're going to do 4 questions. Number 1.
Davidson. I'm I'll just talk. Yeah, I'm Terry Davidson.
Oh, it's working.
Oh, okay, good. All right. I'm Terry Davidson. I'm the director of Center of Behavioral Neuroscience at American University. And I've been funded by either NSF or NIH for about, since 1990. And I do work on diet and brain. And so one of the things that I wanted to comment on was something that's happened over the last 5 or 10 years, and that is I think you're getting information as journalists that are coming through another filter. And that is through kinds of PR people in universities themselves. So what will happen quite often, and I understand why universities are interested in getting their name out in the press, but what will happen quite often is a PR person will come to me, I'll have a paper. Science is incremental in the sense that we build, and what they like to do is make a story out of every single paper. And so it's often the case where I refuse. I don't want that to happen. But I do think that a lot of the things almost everything that's come out from my lab, for example, has been filtered through a PR person, and I don't know how well those filters are, and how well they reflect reality of what's going on in the situation. So it seems to me that I don't think you have time, right, to read actual papers themselves. You actually
I do.
probably.
I do.
Oh, you do? Well, there's zillions of them, of course,
Not me.
right? Yeah. All right. Well, that was my comment. The other thing I was concerned about was you mentioned that NIH panels will look at what's in the press. I've been on those panels since about 1990 as well. I don't know anyone who's influenced by a press study. Now, they may be aware of a study, but what we would, of course, do is look at that study and look at the value of the study itself, not what anybody said in the press. And that stuff has to be included in the grant application.
Thanks, sir.
That's a great point.
We'll do this guy in the middle.
Predicted.
I'm just trying to move it around the room.
Researchers I've talked to.
Jeff Clark with the National Restaurant Association. How much of this issue is just general lack of understanding of science in the population, and then also statistics?
I missed it. Could you ask me what's
Well,
more?
the general understanding of science. Nutrition science is extremely complicated. It takes, there's no way that I think the general public could really understand it.
No, but he's asking,
And statistics,
sir, are you asking
another.
about us reporters or the readers?
He said the general population. Yeah, and I think, and statistics, incredibly complicated. And actually, nutrition science has become more statistically complicated over time. It's become, those epidemiological studies have become so statistically complex that they really, it's almost impossible for anybody to understand them. And there are big epidemiological studies in this country. They're not allowed. The data sets are not available, so you can't go back and look at them and have other researchers look at the same statistics. Anyway, yes, it's hard.
Try and squeeze in. We only got 2 minutes left. This gentleman back here.
Just wondering how you demand rigor.
Microphone, sir.
Just wondering how you demand rigor or skepticism from a population where, according to what I've been reading, a third or 40% of the people don't believe in evolution, or you have presidential candidates who believe in the Garden of Eden and the dinosaurs are 6,000 years old, or things like that. How do you fight against this? What do you do?
I'll take the
These are all fantastic questions.
devil's advocate. I don't really think that the people who answer positively in that direction on those surveys necessarily fully believe what they're signing up to.
Yeah,
Definitely a high percentage. I'm just saying don't believe surveys.
yeah.
Right.
So
We can talk about the eroding quality of surveys over time, too.
there's
right?
kind of like a lot going on there.
Yeah.
But I agree that we have a population that believes a lot of crazy stuff. But what are you going to do? You got to tell good stories based on real science.
Part of it they're not reading what I'm writing, which I basically know I know who's reading what I'm writing. They're not reading what I'm writing, and I can't control what the people they're reading write.
I can.
Unfortunately, they might be able to, but I have no influence over that.
I can. I'll tell you
in
how.
fact, I haven't the
We had a
opposite.
fake chocolate study, and
Yeah.
the people who write the stuff that those people read will cover it. I've seen it happen.
Can I just add one thing to that?
Yeah.
Which is that it is true, and I think that we should aim for at least try to get the source of knowledge to be accurate and correct. I mean, this issue of university press offices sending out press releases, there are a few universities that do that extremely well. And I mean, I commend you for saying, no, I don't want my study out there in that way. But I mean, so if you can reform a little bit expert knowledge at the source and how that is delivered at the very source, I think that will do a lot to try to improve like the overall, at least amongst us educated people who read serious publications. I think it's possible to elevate the quality of conversation.
I just got the kibosh on time. Sorry, fourth question asker after the show. So just very quickly and crudely, raise your hand if your mind has been changed over the course of this discussion from your initial position. Raise your hand high if your position has actually changed from undecided to not undecided or from one way or the other. Raise your hand high. I don't even see anyone. One.
Wow.
Two.
Totally.
Three-ish?
Yeah, I feel totally inadequate.
Either you're all really convinced of your positions or we suck.
Probably the latter.
Sorry. Okay, that's it.
Terrific. Thank you all. Thank you.